Before we get started, a quick reminder. The Crime Shack is listener-supported. If you'd like to help us keep telling these stories, you'll find the support link in the show notes or at thecrimeshack.com. The Crime Shack exists because of listeners like you. Your support makes each episode possible. Check out the link in the show notes or visit thecrimeshack.com to join our community.
911 was the location of the emergency. About 5 minutes ago or so, there was a woman that came on the door. I was upstairs sleeping, but I heard the doorbell ring. The girl was screaming, I guess, and I heard her scream. My son heard her scream, and she's saying, I need help, and there's a whole bunch of blood outside. We need an ambulance now.
Hi, friends. I'm Michelle Pense, and this is the Crime Shack podcast. Some families spend their life savings to save a child. Robbie and Jennifer Tower did just that, only to be stabbed to death in their own home by the boy they rescued from a prison-like orphanage in Ukraine. Today we're talking about adoption, about what happens when love, faith, and good intentions collide with deep, unseated trauma. Thousands of families open their homes to children every year, and most of those stories are hard but beautiful. But when you adopt an older child, especially from another country, you're not just welcoming a child. You're welcoming their past, their losses, their rage, their secrets. And sometimes that past doesn't stay in the past. This podcast contains content that may not be suitable for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. This is the case of Dima Tower, a boy born into chaos in eastern Ukraine, abandoned after his mother's death, shuffled through relatives and foster care, and finally brought to Florida by a devout Christian couple who wanted nothing more than to be mom and dad. They gave him a home, a car, and their last name. He repaid them with more than 140 stab wounds. Robbie James Tower was born in Salem, Massachusetts in August 1974. Friends and family described him as warm, funny, and deeply loyal, the kind of person who turned neighbors into friends and church members into extended family. He was the guy who wore silly socks and goofy t-shirts, but also the guy you called when life fell apart. Robbie was considered a beacon of love, generosity, and intelligence, someone whose infectious humor and dedication left a mark on everyone who knew him. Jennifer Christine Tower, who also went by Jen, was born in Columbus, Ohio in 1972 and was the youngest of 3 sisters. Her life was a patchwork of hard work and ministry. She worked as a paralegal, then a realtor, then launched her own real estate services business, all while serving at church, going on mission trips, and teaching Sunday school. Jennifer was a devout Christian with a warm heart, an animal lover who doted on the raccoons and dogs around their Florida home. She was the kind of person who would drop anything to help and serve others, and she and Robbie were adored in their church community. The two met in Florida, married on October 21st, 2000, and built their life in and around Northport, Florida. Northport is a growing suburban city in southwest Florida, tucked inland in Sarasota County, about 30 to 40 minutes from the Gulf beaches between Tampa and Fort Myers. It's part of the Northport, Sarasota, Bradenton area and has around 80 to 90,000 people, so it's on the larger side as far as suburbs go. Robbie would help Jennifer in real estate and was highly involved in his neighborhood community. He was known affectionately as the mayor of Mellicote Road for the block parties he organized. There's one thing people closest to them agreed on. Robbie and Jennifer desperately wanted to be parents. They tried, but couldn't have children of their own. So they did what many couples of faith do. They turned outward. They started going on Christian mission trips to Ukraine, bringing supplies, visiting orphanages, and sharing their faith in a country that was already struggling politically and economically, even before the full-scale war we're familiar with today. It was those trips that would change everything. In Ukraine, a young boy named Dima had a rough childhood. His mother died when he was 6, or maybe 7, or maybe he was 8. He wasn't really sure. His father was an alcoholic who abandoned him. After that, he was bounced between relatives, first his brother, then an uncle. But none of those arrangements lasted. Within months, he was thrust into Ukraine's foster and orphanage system. The orphanage where he ended up had been described by relatives and reporters as prison-like. Children were reportedly beaten, bruised, and controlled rather than nurtured, living in harsh institutional conditions. Then the war came closer. By 2015, as conflict intensified in eastern Ukraine, the orphanage where Dima lived, near the Luhansk region, was moved to keep the children safer. The system shuttled him around. Adults came and went. The one thing that seemed consistent was instability. At the same time, halfway across the world, Robbie and Jennifer were flying back and forth on mission trips, visiting Ukrainian churches and orphanages, trying to live out what they believed was a calling to serve. Somewhere during those years, paths crossed. The Towers met Dima on one of their trips and were immediately taken by him. He was a middle school-aged boy, small, quiet, and convinced that he was a nobody from nowhere, as he would later describe himself. They began the process of bringing him to the United States. It started with hosting and visits, getting him out of the orphanage for short periods, then progressed to full adoption. By 2015 to 2016, when he was around 14 years old, they had completed the adoption and brought him home to Northport, Florida. He eventually became a U.S. citizen, and the Towers were thrilled the day he took his oath. For Robbie and Jennifer, this wasn't just a legal process. They had drained their savings and took out loans to make this happen, to pay for flights, fees, and the costs of integrating a traumatized teen into American life. They gave Dima a new last name. They gave him their church community. They gave him a bedroom in a Florida home instead of a bunk in an institution. And down the line, they also gave him a car. They essentially tried their best to give him the world. But if you've followed enough adoption stories to know that when you adopt a teenager, you adopt their past, and Dima's past was already leaking into his future. From the outside, the Towers' life with Dima looked hopeful. Their Facebook pages showed smiling photos that included mission trips, church events, and family pictures. Jennifer even changed her profile picture in 2022 to a Pray for Ukraine frame when Russia escalated its invasion, a subtle reminder of the country where her son was born. But as you know, things are not always as they seem on social media. And inside the home, things were much, much harder. Dima arrived in the United States speaking virtually no English, and his adjustment to American culture was difficult and rocky. There were early signs of frustration, volatility, and anger. He had difficulty accepting rules and resisted authority. By 2018, he had his first documented incident with the law. Robbie and Jennifer called authorities to report that Dima had pushed Jennifer during an argument. In 2019, things further escalated. Robbie called police and asked that Dima be removed from the home, telling officers that his son had become physically and verbally abusive. He was so afraid that he slept with his bedroom door locked at night. Let's sit with that for a second. This is a father who had spent years and tens of thousands of dollars to rescue a boy from an orphanage, now telling police that he has to lock his door at night against that boy. A reported incident in 2020 left Robbie with a black eye and injuries to his head after Dima allegedly threw him across the kitchen while they were unloading groceries. Those charges were later dropped by a judge. After at least one of those incidents, Dima was sent to stay with Jennifer's family for a while. But Robbie, still hopeful things could get better, insisted he be allowed to return home. Dima cycled in and out of the Towers' house, moving out, then back in, then leaving again, while Robbie and Jennifer continued to help him financially and lent him money and tried their best to keep him afloat. At church, they were still the smiling, generous couple, but at home, they were walking on eggshells. By 2023, Dima was in his early 20s. It had been several years since he'd been in the U.S., and the situation continued to get worse. Robbie was still telling people he locked his bedroom door at night because he was afraid of what Dima might do. Amidst the chaos, the Towers tried to live out their lives in as normal a way as possible. Robbie continued organizing block parties, and Jennifer visited with church friends or ran to and from real estate showings. In the evening of August 31st, 2023, just before midnight in Northport, Florida, a neighbor heard frantic banging on her front door and heard a woman's voice screaming. When the neighbor opened the door, no one was there, but there was blood on her front steps, and she immediately called 911.
911 was the location of the emergency. About 5 minutes ago or so, there was a woman that came on the door. I was upstairs sleeping, but I heard the doorbell ring. The girl was screaming, I guess, and I heard her scream. My son heard her scream, and she's saying, I need help, and I didn't, when I got downstairs, the person's gone, but
it was one woman. She knocked on your door?
it was a woman's voice I heard. I don't know. And my ring camera doesn't work out there, of course, right now, but yeah, she banged on the door and rang the doorbell.
Okay, so did you ever see her?
I did not, and my camera's not working, so. Oh, there's a whole bunch of blood outside. We need an ambulance now. Someone please, someone. There's blood out there. Yes, there's blood on my front door. Oh, shit.
Okay, I need you to lock the door and stay in the
It's locked, it's locked.
Officers from Northport Police responded to Malakote Road. As they arrived at the Towers' home, they saw a man standing in the driveway. It was 21-year-old Dima Tower. He had blood on his clothes, and he was loading items into the trunk of a car. Police ordered him to stop. Instead, he jumped into the car and sped off, launching what would become an hours-long manhunt across county lines. Back at the Towers' home, police discovered a gruesome scene. When officers entered the home, they found Robbie and Jennifer Tower. They were both lying face down, head to head in the living room, and blood was everywhere. The trail of blood began from the couple's bed. It went across the bedroom, down the hall, into the kitchen, smeared inside the front door, and finally saturated the living room couches and floor. Outside the home, blood drops continued down the driveway to the neighbor's steps, the same steps where that woman later opened her door and saw only blood. While Robbie and Jennifer lay head-to-head on the living room floor, officers outside were focused on the blood-stained young man driving away from the house. Police pursued Dima's car onto I-75, where deputies deployed spike strips. When his tires were punctured, he veered off the road and abandoned the vehicle and took off running into the nearby woods. For nearly 8 hours, Sarasota County deputies, Northport Police, and neighboring departments combed the area in an all-night search, and drones and canines were deployed. Meanwhile, crime scene technicians were processing the scene at the house, photographing the trail of blood, documenting the position of the bodies, collecting the knives, and preserving footprints and fingerprints. At around 8 a.m. the next morning, a Shell gas station manager noticed a disheveled young man, dirty with blood still visible on his hands, wandering near the pumps. It was Dima. He'd slept or hidden outside, still wearing bloody clothes. The manager called police, and Dima was taken into custody without incident. Autopsies of Robbie and Jennifer were conducted. Robbie suffered at least 68 cutting and stab wounds, many to his face, back, neck, scalp, side, shoulder, and arm. He died from catastrophic blood loss after wounds to major arteries in his neck. Jennifer suffered 79 separate wounds, including extensive injuries to her face and neck. 38 of those wounds were to her neck alone. Between the two victims, the medical examiner estimated more than 140 stab wounds in total. Both were alive for at least part of their assault, but bled to death in their own living room. The investigation into the murders followed the blood trail in the home. The attack began in the master bedroom, in the dark. Robbie was stabbed again and again as he tried to get away, moving from the bed into the hallway and toward the living room. Each time he tried to crawl or stagger forward, Dima followed, stabbing. Jennifer woke up, tried to intervene, and at some point either shielded her husband or tried to get between them. She was also stabbed repeatedly. At some point during the attack, she managed to run out of the house and out the front door, trying desperately to get help from anyone. She ran towards the neighbor's house, screaming. But close behind Jennifer was Dima. He followed her outside, grabbed her, drug her back inside the house, threw her onto the sofa, and continued stabbing her repeatedly. Back at the station, with Dima now in custody, detectives began their interview. Dima fully confessed to the killings, acknowledging that he had stabbed his parents repeatedly. He would eventually plead not guilty to 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder and fleeing law enforcement, but neither his defense team nor he himself ever claimed he did not kill Robbie and Jennifer. The state of Florida versus Dima Tower unfolded in Sarasota County in November 2025, and cameras were allowed in the courtroom, capturing harrowing testimony and graphic evidence. The entire trial would hinge on intent. Was this premeditated, calculated first-degree murder, or some lesser form of homicide fueled by past trauma and rage? The prosecution laid out their case and told the sequence of events. On the night of the attacks, Dima came home already thinking about killing his parents. He went to his room and drank alone, nursing that thought. Then he walked to the kitchen, took a sharp knife, and moved down the hallway towards his parents' bedroom, where Robbie and Jennifer were asleep. It was dark in the bedroom, almost too dark to see, but Dima headed towards Robbie first and immediately began stabbing. Dima lost grip of his first knife. Either it slipped from his bloody hands or broke. So he went back to the kitchen, grabbed a second knife, and continued that attack on Robbie, then Jennifer. After the killings, he tried to wash that second knife in the sink, leaving traces of diluted blood. DNA analysts later told the jury that blood on both knives contained mixtures matching Robbie and Dima with statistical certainty in the billions. Dima's defense attorney, Mark Gilman, painted a picture of a boy who never had a chance. A mother who died when he was young, an alcoholic father who rejected him, years in an abusive prison-like orphanage in eastern Ukraine, a war that displaced him yet again, and a move to a foreign country where he didn't speak the language and felt uprooted and alone. In this version, his violence was the inevitable product of a system that failed him, not the cold-blooded act the prosecution described. Prosecutors, however, contrasted that with what Robbie and Jennifer did after they met him. They hosted him and then adopted him. They paid for his immigration and citizenship. They bought him a car. They gave him credit cards. They kept him in their lives even after he threatened them and assaulted them. In 2019, Robbie had told police that he was afraid of what Dima might do to him at night, yet he still never sought a restraining order or fully cut him off. Dr. Russell Vega, the chief medical examiner, took the stand and walked the jury through the autopsies of Robbie and Jennifer. Both victims were lying face down when most of their wounds were inflicted, which suggested continued stabbing even after they were prone and defenseless. The autopsy photos showed devastating injuries, puncture wounds, slicing wounds, overlapping patterns where multiple stabs struck near the same spot. Courtroom observers noted that at least once Dima looked away as the most graphic photos were displayed. Medical testimony also confirmed what the blood patterns suggested. The attack began in the bedroom, moved through the hallway, into the kitchen, and then into the living room where both bodies were ultimately found. The neighbor who heard the banging and screams that night described the fear of opening her door to find nothing but blood. She heard a woman screaming but saw no one, just red streaks on the steps and porch. She called 911, not yet knowing that Jennifer lay dying just yards away in her own house. Crime scene technicians testified about the blood-soaked couches and cushions, the cast-off patterns indicating repeated swinging of a knife, the blood on the inside of the front door suggesting someone tried to get out or was pulled back in, and a rag in the kitchen with diluted blood, consistent with someone trying to wash off one of the knives. Then, in a highly unusual and shocking move, and I'm certain against his attorney's advice, Dima chose to testify in his own defense. On direct examination, he talked about his childhood, recalling the time period that his mother died. He spoke about his alcoholic father, his time with relatives, and finally his stay in the orphanage. He described Ukraine as a harsh place where some people don't know how to be parents. Here's an excerpt of Dima's testimony. It's a harsh and uncomfortable listen. Almost the entire time on the stand, he sits with his head down, his eyes fixated on the desk in front of him, and his mouth and nose close to the microphone so it catches every breath in and out. One thing I noted that was odd was that there was not an interpreter present in the court for him. Now, Dima did know English fairly well, but it appears that he either did not fully understand some of the questions or he was playing it off as if he did not understand the questions. Either way, I would think that an interpreter would have helped overall. But take a listen and you decide.
Did you go to school here in Sarasota County?
The questions that you're asking me are very complicated, and cannot be simply answered, but I'm forced to simply answer the questions, which cannot, for no right reason, can be answered simply. These are not simple questions.
All right. And how long did you live with the Towers prior to, either graduating high school or moving out?
Again, this is a complicated question, and the answer, it can be very long because I moved in, I moved out.
When did you move back in with them prior to August the 31st of 2023?
I don't understand the question.
In August of 2023, which is the incident that we're talking about, how long prior to that were you back living with the house? Because I know you had just moved back there, correct?
Yeah, I assumed that
Do you need a moment, Mr. Tower?
At this point in the testimony, Dima's emotions took over, and he began to audibly sob. The judge immediately had the jury removed from the courtroom so he could try to regain control before proceeding. When testimony resumed, Dima went on to say how he hated his life in America, that he felt isolated, misunderstood, and pressured. When asked about the night of the murders, he admitted to them, but insisted he wasn't thinking clearly, that he was in what he called a rage, or temporarily insane, and that his mind was gone. Then it was time for cross-examination. The prosecutor focused on those long minutes between picking up the knife and the final blows, asking over and over, "You had time to think, didn't you?" And the same as on direct, Dima never looked up once, but remained with his head down, mouth and nose up against the microphone, and spoke with indignation.
You made Jennifer and Robbie's life in their home a living hell, didn't you, Mr. Tower?
again, there was a lot that went on.
Yes.
Yes, but
Yes.
some adults don't know how to be
Yes.
parents. Yes.
You made their life a living
Yeah, no,
hell.
I didn't. There's some adults don't know how to be parents. You don't know what you're talking about.
In fact,
I came from a harsh environment.
many people come from a harsh
Yeah,
environment,
but
and they don't
gotta
kill
know,
their parents.
you gotta know how to treat those people correctly so they grow up properly.
Yeah, so how do you need to be treated?
I have been treated. It's too late for that. I'm adult now. But you're talking as if you don't know how to be a parent.
You made their life
Pointless
a living
question.
hell. In fact, your father told you that you were destroying his marriage.
If I
to
made-
his wife, isn't it true?
If I made their life a
Mr.
living hell, that's probably had something to do with them.
The prosecutor's message was clear. Robbie and Jennifer forgave Dima for everything. And he killed them because he didn't like rules, authority, or consequences. The level of violence was so extreme that in closing arguments, the prosecutor pointed to the sheer number of wounds as physical evidence of premeditation and intent. Not a single moment of snapping, but a sustained, deliberate choice to keep stabbing long after both parents were incapacitated. Closing arguments were wrapped and the case went to the jury. The defense did not ask for an acquittal, but they did ask for a lesser conviction, manslaughter or at most second-degree murder, arguing that no one who'd been through what Dima had could truly form premeditated intent. The prosecution came back and pointed to Dima's own words. He said he came home with a plan. He admitted he took the knife and walked down the hall. He confirmed he continued stabbing even after switching knives. He tried to wash a weapon and fled from police. In their view, this wasn't a momentary snap. This was a deliberate decision nurtured over hours. And on November 14, 2025, after deliberating for less than 2 hours, The jury found Dima Tower guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of fleeing law enforcement. Before sentencing, family members gave emotional impact statements. Robbie's father, Philip Tower, told Dima that he didn't want him to use the family name anymore, that the name Tower should no longer belong to the man who had killed the 2 people who loved him. Judge Krug then gave Dima the opportunity to speak, but with a warning. He could speak, but if he insulted the victims or tried to relitigate the case, the judge would cut him off.
What I have to say is our feelings block out our intellect, so I must ignore the irrational testimonies I heard about the life that I had with adopted parents of mine, and prior to that, I must only speak the truth, that I expect these adults to understand. And the conclusion I have come to is not only that everything evolves around God, that we must understand that we live in an unmanly world. And what this means is...
Mr. Tower, I'm not concerned about what world you believe in. Do you wish to offer an apology and remorse to the victims?
Yes, I'm getting to that, yes.
Cut right to it. I don't want to hear what world you think you live in.
Well, I'm going to cut right to it. The remorse that I have for my adopted parents is, it might be unshown. That doesn't mean it's not felt. Because when I committed these acts of crime, I lost my mind, and somebody might think that I knew what I was doing. I did not know what I was doing. The truth is, there are a lot of fatherless children out there. And my apology in this is that nobody want to be held accountable for their actions. And I'm being held accountable for the actions of grown men. So my apology is that I have to be responsible for what Oscar did to his children and what Phil did to his children. And how can I apologize for the mistreatment that Oscar, as a stepfather...
All right, I'm going to have the defendant removed from the stand. He's choosing not to give an apology.
Instead of focusing on remorse, Dima criticized his adoptive parents' parenting, quickly veering into blaming others for his actions. Then Judge Krug handed down his sentence.
Mr. Tower, I don't know what else to say. You seem to be an evil spirit, an evil person.
Evil spirit because you're talking foolish.
Who doesn't seem to have any...
I'm full of remorse. I'm not showing it because...
I will at this time, Mr. Tower, sentence you as to count 1. This is for first-degree murder of Robbie Tower. I will sentence you to life in prison. I am going to adjudicate you guilty of count 2, first-degree premeditated murder on Jennifer Tower. I will run this sentence consecutive to count 1. I will sentence you, Mr. Tower, to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The boy who once thought he'd been saved from a Ukrainian orphanage was now headed to a United States prison for the rest of his life. Back to a world of bars, numbers, and strict rules, but this time of his own making. As horrifying as this case is, it taps into a fear that many adoptive parents, especially those who adopt older children, are afraid to say out loud. What if my love isn't enough? Robbie and Jennifer Tower did almost everything right, at least on paper. They didn't adopt impulsively. They met Dima on mission trips and built a relationship over time. They were financially stable. They had a strong, rooted, faith-based community and had extended family support. They poured in time, money, and emotional energy. And when things went wrong, when he pushed Jennifer and when he attacked Robbie, they reached out to police and family. But they gave Dima second chances, over and over. And still, they died in the most violent way imaginable, at the hands of the son they chose. Does that mean adopting older children, especially traumatized teens from overseas, is too risky? That's the hard question behind this story. Most adoptions, including older child and international adoptions, do not end in violence. Many children with deep trauma go on to live full lives when given stable homes, therapy, and appropriate boundaries. But those stories just don't make headlines. But this case does highlight some brutal truths. Trauma doesn't disappear at the airport. The abuse, neglect, and war Dima experienced in Ukraine didn't evaporate when he landed in Florida. It traveled with him, buried deep, but still very much alive. Love is not a substitute for treatment. Even the most loving, faith-filled parents can't single-handedly undo years of damage without specialized support, trauma-informed therapy, consistent structure, and sometimes very hard safety decisions. Red flags do matter. Robbie sleeping with his door locked, the police calls in 2018, 2019, and 2020, a black eye, a father explicitly telling officers he was afraid of his own son. Those aren't normal growing pains. They're warning sirens. But here's the paradox that breaks my heart. The very qualities that make someone likely to adopt a child like Dima, compassion, faith, a belief in second chances, are the same qualities that can make it hard to enforce boundaries or walk away when safety is on the line. Robbie and Jennifer believed in redemption. They believed their son was more than the worst things he'd ever done. They believed sincerely that they could love him into a better life. But in the end, that belief cost them everything. Somewhere in Ukraine, there's an aging orphanage file with Dima's original paperwork, notes from social workers, maybe a fading photograph, a record of a baby whose parents didn't or couldn't keep him. For a time, it looked like his story had been rewritten. Orphan to son, war zone to suburb, nobody to somebody. But on August 31st, 2023, in a beige Florida house on Mellicote Road, the past and the present collided in a way that left two good people dead and a family destroyed. As we close this episode, I want to be very clear. This story is not a reason to fear every adopted child or every teen with a difficult past. It is a reminder that when we step into someone else's trauma, we have to go in with open eyes, and we have to take our own safety seriously. Adoption can be one of the most beautiful things a family ever does. It can also be one of the riskiest when the child coming into your home has a history of violence, untreated mental illness, or years of chronic abuse. Robbie and Jennifer Tower wanted so much to give a boy a future. Instead, they became his final victims. That's it, friends. Thank you for listening to this episode and for your continued and valued support. Be sure to connect with me on social media and subscribe to my podcast on whatever platform you listen to your podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Until next time, stay safe, everyone. Every episode we make is fueled by listener support. If you'd like to help us create more, you'll find the link in the show notes or at thecrimeshack.com.